Our story begins with Kazuya, a high school boy who's always cherished his late mother's kimono sash. One day, however, Kazuya wakes up from a bad dream, only to discover that he's accidentally touching Chisato, his classmate and childhood friend. After escaping her wrath, Kazuya goes to the roof, where he smells his late mother's kimono sash and is comforted by its familiar cherry blossom aroma. Suddenly, Kazuya is attacked by a possessed wig that knocks him off the building. And just as he's certain he's about to die, his mother's kimono sash transforms into a blue-haired girl named Kiriha that saves Kazuya's life. She is a tsukumogami, which in Japanese folklore is an inanimate object that has gained a spirit through long years of harmony with their owners. Their opponent, however, is an amasogi, which are spirits born from strong malevolent desires. In this case, the amasogi was born from a wig due to the host's strong love for Kazuya. As Kiriha fights off against the amasogi and its host, she threatens Kazuya to become her loyal servant, or else she'll hand him over to their opponent. With no other choice, Kazuya agrees to be her servant, allowing Kiriha to put an end to the fight by piercing through the wig. But while Kazuya tends to the unconscious host, Kiriha vanishes out of sight. Later that night, Kazuya reflects on the day's crazy events before falling asleep, and has another nightmare. When he reawakens, however, he finds Kiriha in his bed laying next to him, and screams in shock. This causes Kazuya's little sister to run up the stairs and see what all the commotion is about, but she finds that nothing is out of the ordinary as she is unaware that Kazuya has hidden Kiriha behind his bed. After his sister leaves, Kiriha reminds Kazuya that he agreed to be her servant, and sends him off to buy her some pudding. After dinner, Kiriha surprisingly joins Kazuya in the bath and offers to wash his back. Kazuya is taken aback by this, but she reminds him that they used to bathe together all the time in the past when she was still in her kimono sash form, and pokes fun at how much Kazuya's manhood has grown since then. That night, the two share a bed once more, and Kazuya remembers how he used to sleep with his mother's kimono sash all the time, and Kiriha's familiar cherry blossom aroma manages to ease his mind. Despite this, Kazuya is understandably still too uncomfortable to sleep with such a beauty. The next morning, Kiriha wakes up before Kazuya and watches him sleep. But when he talks badly about her in his sleep, she decides to put an end to his family tree. To make matters worse, Kazuya is late for school because of her and is punished by Chisato once he arrives. She then drags him to the library so he can catch up on his incomplete homework. Once there, the two reminisce about how Chisato used to tutor Kazuya when they were younger, which leads Chisato to ask if she could come over to his house to tutor him again. And although Kazuya is tempted to say yes, he refuses out of fear of Kiriha being discovered. After they finish their homework, the two suddenly find themselves trapped in the library and are unable to escape. Suddenly, Kazuya spots Kiriha in the library for some reason, and is forced to introduce her to Chisato. Kiriha then explains that they are trapped within the library because of an amasogi, much like the wig they had encountered the previous day, and they must find the evil spirit's host in order to escape. But when they can't find any clues leading them to the host, Kiriha decides to take matters into her own hands, or her own cloths I should say, and attempts to break free. This only makes the situation worse, however, as the library begins to transform into a giant book golem. But as Kiriha fights back, she notices that the books are defending Chisato, and realizes that she is the host of the amasogi. Seeing this, Kiriha tells Kazuya that he must fulfill Chisato's desire in order to free them. Kazuya then thinks back to what might be Chisato's desire, and decides to ask her if she would like to come to his house to tutor him, which makes the library return to normal after she agrees. The next day, Chisato visits Kazuya to tutor him, only to find him in bed with Kiriha and punishes him thoroughly for this indecency. Afterwards, Chisato apologizes for causing the situation at the library, but Kiriha reassures her that it was not entirely her fault, because the amasogi was created due to an abnormally high concentration of evil energy, which should never have happened, and that the blame is on Kukuri, the local deity in charge of such things. The next day, Shiro, one of Kazuya's friends, is approached by Kokuyo, a large-chested shrine maiden who works for Kukuri. Hoping to be able to feel her huge melons, Shiro invites her out to lunch, which she agrees to. Shiro soon regrets this invitation, however, when Kokuyo drains his wallet by ordering nearly everything on the menu. The next day at school, Shiro attacks Kazuya as he blames him for the abuse his wallet suffered the previous day. Moments later, students notice that several of their lunches have been eaten by someone else, but it doesn't take long for them to realize that Kokuyo is the culprit. She then orders Kazuya to accompany her to see Kukuri, but tells him that his washcloth should stay behind. Angered by being called a washcloth, Kiriha transforms into her human form and challenges her to an arm wrestling match, and says that if she wins, she gets to go with Kazuya to meet Kukuri. After agreeing to the terms of the duel, they go up to the roof and change into gym uniforms, which the boys greatly enjoy. Once the duel begins, however, the two girls engage in deadly one-armed melee combat, rather than arm wrestling. And after a fierce trade of blows, Kiriha is eventually victorious. They are then taken to see Kukuri, who greets them while wearing a strange mask. After introducing herself, Kukuri asks Kazuya to become an exorcist, and explains that he has a rare ability to attract amasogi, but Kiriha refuses to put him in harm's way. When they try to leave, however, Kukuri traps them inside a barrier and forces the two to fight her. Kiriha tries her best to fend off Kukuri's water attacks, but finds herself quickly overwhelmed by her impressive power. Kiriha then looks on in terror as Kukuri casts one of her most powerful spells onto them. Kiriha barely manages to defend against the attack, but is left exhausted and begins to reduce into her chibi form as she uses up more and more of her power. Kukuri then uses the same attack a second time, completely destroying Kiriha's defense while flooding both Kazuya and her. But as Kazuya passes out, he converses with a vision of his mother, who instructs him to fight alongside Kiriha by using her true name. When he awakens, Kazuya calls out Kiriha's true name, which transforms her back into her kimono sash form, allowing him to wield her as a weapon, and even mimic his mother's signature drill technique. This attack is stopped by Kukuri, however, who grabs a hold of Kiriha and threatens Kazuya to accept becoming an exorcist, or else she'll rip his washcloth to shreds. And in order to save Kiriha's life, Kazuya has no choice but to agree. Suddenly, the strings that hold Kukuri's mask snap off, reducing her into a chibi form as well. Upon seeing this, Kiriha immediately begins to mock Kukuri. Afterwards, Kukuri explains that this was all a ploy so Kazuya would learn to wield Kiriha, and an angry Kiriha punishes her for this. On their way back home, however, Kazuya promises Kiriha that he'll try his best to become a powerful exorcist so he can keep her safe. Once home, Kiriha phones several people to ask for little girl clothes for Kiriha to wear, but everyone he calls confuses him for a creep. Eventually, his friend Osamu happily provides him with several outfits from his own collection. Unfortunately, these are all weird cosplay outfits, with one of them basically just being a couple of strings. As time passes, Kiriha trains Kazuya to become an exorcist, but she's frustrated when he's unable to replicate the skills displayed during their battle with Kukuri. Afterwards, Kiriha explains that it's important for him to learn to wield her as a weapon, since spirits like her are much more vulnerable in their human forms. Meanwhile, Kukuri and Kokuyo don't have money to get the shrine fixed, and it eventually collapses during a storm. Because of this, they have to move their quarters to the park and are ridiculed by Kiriha when she happens to pass by. The next day at school, Kazuya is summoned by the school's student council president, who is also the host of the wig amasogi they had previously encountered. He asks Kazuya and Kiriha to investigate a series of mysterious amasogi manifestations that have been occurring with the Tabletop Games Association. Their investigation soon leads them to Nakajima, but when they confront him, he summons a minotaur by drawing it on a notepad possessed by an evil spirit, and orders it to attack Kazuya and Kiriha in hopes of forcing the student council president to recognize the Tabletop Games Association as an official club. Unable to battle the Minotaur head-on, Kazuya, Kiriha, and Osamu attempt to outsmart Nakajima by erasing his Minotaur with a fire extinguisher. But despite this being successful, Nakajima simply summons another Minotaur to continue fighting them. However, Osamu manages to steal the possessed notebook, and draws an even stronger dragon to defeat the Minotaur. After their victory, the group agrees to destroy the Amasogi notepad. But before doing so, Osamu uses it to draw an adult version of Kiriha, which just ends up beating up Kazuya. Sometime later, a student named Hiroshi confesses his love to Chisato, but she rejects him as she is already in love with someone else. Upon hearing this, Kazuya wonders who Chisato might be in love with, much to Kiriha's annoyance. When they arrive at school the next day, Kazuya is shocked to see that the entire school has been turned into a dating sim game due to an amasogi. To make matters worse, Hiroshi and Chisato seem to be getting along better than ever before, which leads Kiriha to realize that Hiroshi must be the host of this amasogi. When Kazuya tries to confront him about this, however, Chisato slaps him in defense of Hiroshi. Kazuya then realizes that in order to save his childhood friend, he is forced to compete with Hiroshi for Chisato's affection by playing the game. However, none of the dialogue options that Kazuya chooses go as planned, and Chisato ends up hating him even more. Kazuya then enlists Osamu's help to win Chisato's affection, and together they abuse a glitch that can help Kazuya win the game. When Hiroshi is about to ask Chisato out under the cherry blossom tree, Kazuya interrupts him before he can finish, by pulling two dolls out of his backpack, and telling Chisato that he wants to play house with her like they did when they were kids. Thanks to this, Chisato's affection is raised to the maximum level, as she reminisces about the time she used to play house with Kazuya in kindergarten. Afterwards, Kiriha and Osamu chase after Hiroshi, while Kazuya and Chisato head to the infirmary so they can rest. When Kiriha and Osamu finally catch Hiroshi, he reveals that the amasogi is actually just a CD in the computer lab. Surprised by this, Osamu realizes that Hiroshi unknowingly used the PC version of the dating sim game, which turns out to be the adult version. Meanwhile, in the infirmary, Kazuya is tied to the bed by Chisato, who's determined to play house like real adults. Desperate to save Kazuya before it's too late, Kiriha rushes to the infirmary, while Osamu and Hiroshi rush to the computer lab and destroy the amasogi. Unfortunately, Kiriha arrives too late and is shocked by what she witnesses. Afterwards, Chisato and Kazuya are flustered around each other and refuse to disclose what they did together. The next day, while Kazuya heads out to buy some pudding, Kiriha and Kukuri have a little friendly chat while building a sand dam, until a duo of rowdy boys come to ruin it. This angers Kiriha and causes her to go after them until Kazuya arrives to stop her. He then takes both girls home to get cleaned up, but while in the bath they continue their little spat. That lasts until both of them pass out from heat exhaustion. Afterwards, Kukuri heads back home to the park, while Kazuya and Kiriha settle down for dinner. But after dinner, Kazuya plans to take some of his large leftovers to Kiriha, only to learn that his family already knew about her existence, because Kazuya's father knew her ever since he began courting Kazuya's mother way back in high school, where Kiriha always gave him a rough time. Afterwards, Kazuya decides to bring Kukuri some pudding too, only to find that their temporary shrine has been demolished by the city after some parents complained about it being a safety hazard to children. Seeing this, Kiriha takes pity on them and invites them to stay with Kazuya and her. This is initially met with opposition from Kazuya's sister and father, but Kazuya's father quickly changes his mind when Kiriha threatens to blackmail him with the embarrassing love letters that he wrote to Kazuya's mother when they were teenagers. Sometime later, Kazuya's sister grows tired of Kiriha always lounging around the house doing nothing but eating snacks and watching anime recaps, so she forces her to help prepare dinner. She then sends Kazuya and the girls to go buy extra ingredients at the supermarket. But when they arrive there and Kazuya refuses to buy Kiriha some pudding, she begins to throw a tantrum, until he eventually gives in to her demands. He then decides to buy Kukuri some sweets too, and she begins to imagine what being married to him would be like. And when they return home, the two girls happily enjoy their desserts together. The next day at school, Kazuya finds that Shiro has mysteriously become incredibly popular with women, and they quickly realize that Shiro's been using a perfume possessed by an amasogi, which instantly makes the wearer popular with all the girls that smell it. When the boys in school hear about this, however, they all fight to have the perfume for themselves, forcing Kazuya to take Shiro away to the roof, where he convinces him to destroy the perfume. But it instead bounces up and covers Kazuya. The effects soon become apparent when he races home after being chased by several girls throughout town. But when he arrives home, Kazuya is relieved to see that his sister is still acting normally around him. So he hops into the bath to try to wash away the scent, but is soon joined by his sister, much to his embarrassment. One by one, the girls of the house all enter the bathroom and join Kazuya in the tub. Wish that was me. The next day at school, Shiro begins emitting a foul stench for the whole week straight, as a consequence of not destroying the bottle properly. As time goes on, Kazuya and Kiriha continue to train by doing mock battles with Kukuri, but Kiriha becomes more and more infuriated as they continue to lose. The next day, Kazuya, Chisato, and Osamu are summoned by the student council president to investigate the appearance of an amasogi that has taken on the appearance of a girl named Aiko, who had taken her own life 2 years prior. During their investigation, they run into Nanako, a member of the school's newspaper club who is also investigating the same case. Suddenly, Aiko appears and attacks the group, but she manages to escape after Kazuya successfully fends off her attacks. As they continue their investigation and consolidate clues, they uncover information about Aiko's little sister being enrolled at their school, under the name Nanako. They race to find her and eventually confront her about this new information. Nanako then explains that she was deeply distraught by her sister's death, and after finding a lock of her hair, it transformed into an amasogi. She blamed her sister's death on the students who bullied her, but when Nanako reads Aiko's final letter, which had been kept hidden from her, she learns that Aiko took her life due to an amasogi that had began growing on her chest, and that it soon began demanding the death of Nanako, forcing Aiko to end her life in order to save her sister. Heartbroken that her sister died for her, Aiko transforms into an even stronger amasogi that feeds off of Nanako's negative energy. Kazuya struggles to combat it at first, but through Kiriha's coaching, he eventually gains the upper hand and defeats it. Kiriha then encourages Nanako to try and find a reason to live, because if she continues wishing to die, then her sister's death would have been for nothing. Meanwhile, a mysterious girl watches from afar. While leaving school the next day, Kazuya is attacked by Tsuneo, another exorcist. And when Kiriha comes to his defense, Tsuneo is forced to reveal her partner, Kotetsu, who transforms into a sword. But as the fight comes to an end, she expresses her disappointment in Kazuya's fighting ability and calls him unfit to be Kiriha's wielder. The four of them then head to Kazuya's home, where Kukuri explains that she had given Tsuneo permission to test Kazuya's abilities, which Kiriha punishes her for. Tsuneo then explains that when she was a child, Kazuya's mother had killed the amasogi responsible for her brother's death, depriving her of the opportunity to get revenge. As such, she became fixated on defeating Kazuya's mother instead, but could never match her in battle, which is why she is sickened by Kazuya's inexperience. She then tells Kazuya that he is unfit to be his mother's replacement and challenges him to a duel over Kiriha, which Kiriha agrees to, despite Kazuya remaining silent. That night, Kazuya becomes depressed as he reflects on all the trouble he's caused thus far, and feels that it's best to just let Tsuneo become his mother's replacement. However, Kiriha grows impatient with him and forces him to strip to embarrass him. She then begins encouraging him to fight by reassuring him that she'll always be on his side no matter what, and tells him that if he wins, she'll reward him. Kiriha then suddenly reverts back to her original adult form, and the two begin thinking of a plan to win the upcoming duel. Kazuya and Kiriha then spend the next few days training to prepare for Tsuneo's sword techniques, since their cloth powers are naturally disadvantaged against swords. Meanwhile, Tsuneo also trains with her local deity and becomes convinced that there's no way she'll lose, despite Kotetsu warning her not to underestimate Kazuya. That night, while Kazuya and Kiriha get ready for bed, he proclaims that he'll win no matter what and that he won't let anything happen to Kiriha. This greatly embarrasses her, as she was previously always the one protecting him. On the day of the duel, Tsuneo thinks about Kazuya being unworthy of being his mother's successor, while Kazuya thinks about his responsibility for attracting amasogi and how Tsuneo treats Kotetsu like a tool. Once the duel begins, Kazuya attacks immediately with a new doll technique that he devised with Kiriha, but Tsuneo pierces through it. And as the fight continues, Tsuneo finds herself more and more pressured by Kazuya's new techniques that she's never seen before. Finally seeing an opening, Tsuneo goes in for the final strike. But her attack is blocked by Kazuya's hand weave technique, and he immediately counterattacks. Kotetsu then warns her about conserving her energy, but she ignores him. The fight then suddenly comes to a standstill as both combatants plan their next moves. Despite being stronger with his ranged attacks, Kazuya tells Kiriha that he's not willing to play it safe to ensure victory, as he wants to beat Tsuneo at her full strength to prove that Kiriha and Kotetsu are more than just tools. Kazuya then charges at her while she concentrates her energy to use her secret technique, known as Hibikiri. At that same time, Kazuya and Kiriha become one, and his hair turns into a glowing white, while his eyes turn a bright red. This is called Ascension, which is a controlled state similar to being possessed by an amasogi that can only be used by highly skilled exorcists. Kazuya then wraps his arms in cloth to parry Tsuneo's attacks, and the two continue to trade blows in deadly melee combat, with neither one giving an inch to their opponent, until Kazuya ends up breaking Kotetsu and uses his finishing move to put an end to the fight. With Kazuya declared the winner, Tsuneo gracefully accepts defeat and learns to cherish Kotetsu more. As they say their goodbyes, they decide to go back home to celebrate, but Kazuya collapses from fatigue, a side effect of using Ascension. That night, Kiriha remembers that she promised Kazuya to reward him for winning, so she strips him down and rewards him by washing every inch of his body with Kukuri's help, as she once again fantasizes about being married to Kazuya. When they finally head to bed afterwards, Kazuya has a dream of what appears to be a black-haired Kiriha, followed by the real Kiriha stabbing Kazuya's mother. But when he awakens from this nightmare, he ironically finds himself in a dreamlike situation, which is rudely interrupted by Kazuya's older sister, who warns Kiriha to stay away from her brother, while warning Kazuya that he's about to be late for school. Meanwhile, Tsuneo's mother reprimands her for causing trouble and losing a duel. She then says that the only way Tsuneo can inherit the family estate now is if she marries the man who defeated her. Later on at school, the class is introduced to a new exchange student. To their surprise, the new student is Kiriha. But when the other male students see how close she is with Kazuya, they grow jealous and demand to know the nature of their relationship. To which Kiriha replies that they are intimately familiar, and that they even regularly sleep and bathe together. This immediately infuriates their male classmates, prompting them to start a mock trial in class in order to judge Kazuya for his crimes. And it doesn't take long for the jealous boys to find Kazuya guilty on all charges, and they punish him for his blessed harem life. After class, Kazuya speaks in private with Shiro, Chisato, and Osamu, where Kiriha explains that she lives with Kazuya because she's his Tsugumomo, which Osamu immediately recognizes as the little girl who helped them battle their cursed amasogi. Kazuya goes on to explain that he wishes to form a special club to deal with the various paranormal activities occurring around the school, in hopes of helping students overcome their afflictions and to prevent the creation of new amasogi. Shiro, Chisato, and Osamu all agree to join the personal advice club, as well as other students who are grateful to Kazuya for helping them in the past. Later that night, as Chisato is sound asleep in her room dreaming of Kazuya, two weird people sneak into her room and rummage through Chisato's wardrobe. The next day at school during swim class, Chisato enters the girls' locker room only to find that their clothes have been scattered everywhere and catches a glimpse of a mysterious creature before it escapes through the vents. Immediately afterwards, Kazuya holds their first club meeting to discuss Chisato's findings, and Kiriha confirms that what Chisato witnessed was likely an amasogi, that is, stealing girls' underwear for some reason. Shiro then devises a plan to catch this amasogi with bait, and demands that the girls give him their panties, which Chisato immediately hits him for. Despite this, Kiriha actually agrees with Shiro's plan and they end up using her underwear as bait, which surprisingly works as they catch the culprit and discover the amasogi to be a childish pair of undergarments. Kazuya immediately recognizes them as Chisato's, but she denies it, prompting it to flee to the school roof. Kiriha and Kazuya chase after it, however, and quickly catch up to it, where the amasogi gathers evil energy and transforms into a giant frog monster. But as Kazuya and Kiriha fight off against it, they find that their attacks seem to have no effect on it. Suddenly, Chisato and the others arrive at the rooftop, where Kazuya once again confronts Chisato about the underwear belonging to her. And although Chisato reluctantly admits that it does belong to her, she has no idea how an amasogi could be born from it. Kazuya is then suddenly struck by the frog, but he shows how much he's grown by saving himself from danger and striking the frog with his triple drill technique. And after defeating the frog, it reverts back to its childish form. Chisato then tells them that although the underwear is hers, she hasn't used them since she was a little girl. And upon hearing this, Kiriha forces Kazuya to take off his boxers, which she gives to the amasogi as she deduces that it was simply lonely from being discarded and unused. The pieces of underwear float up to the sky into a beam of light, which is seen by Kukuri while she reads manga, Kokyo while she delivers for Uber Eats, and is even seen by an astronaut in space. But while the group celebrates their club's first success, the poor Kazuya covers himself in embarrassment. Later that night at school, however, a group of students discuss the defeat of the frog amasogi as a mysterious girl tells them to prepare the next one. The next day, Kiriha heads to Tsunao's family residence and knocks on her door, but no one answers her. Suddenly, Tsunao is launched through the walls of her house, and while Kiriha checks to see if she's okay, Suzumu, Tsunao's intimidating father, begins to cry over Tsunao while worrying if she's okay. Suzuri, Tsunao's mother, then emerges from the broken wall and tells her husband not to coddle Tsunao. Tsunao then gets up to continue her duel with her mother and is promptly defeated within a matter of seconds. And shortly after Tsunao takes a swift L, Kazuya arrives at her house, but upon walking closer, he's overcome with an aura of death, while Suzumu stands on the other side of the door ready to strike Kazuya down for hurting his daughter. But Suzuri quickly disposes of her husband before he can do any harm, and invites Kazuya inside, who is immediately shocked by the pool of Suzumu's blood on the floor. Suzuri then leads Kazuya to Tsunao, who's now wearing a kimono, and after giving the two some tea, Suzuri leaves them alone. Tsunao then apologizes to Kazuya for her previous actions, and thanks him for helping her realize how important kotetsu is to her. She then explains that she's unable to inherit her family's dojo since Kazuya defeated her in combat, unless he marries her. She begs him to become her husband, before threatening to kill him if he doesn't. But when Suzuri suddenly returns, the two are forced to pretend to be a loving couple. Suzuri, however, is not convinced by this display, and tests the two supposed lovers by having them bathe together while she watches. Unbeknownst to them, however, Suzumu is hiding within the bath waters, waiting for an opportunity to strike Kazuya. And as the two enter the bath, Suzumu strikes, but accidentally hits Tsunao instead, forcing Suzuri to once again dispose of her husband, while leaving a literal bloodbath behind. And after all is said and done, Suzuri learns that Kazuya and Tsunao lied to her about being a couple, and as punishment, she brings them to her torture room. After their punishment is complete, Tsunao escorts Kazuya off their premises. Later that night, Tsunao squirms around in her futon in embarrassment over the events of the day. The next day at after school, Shiro meets with Mana, a talented track and field athlete who he sent a love letter to. But when a girl named Mitsuri shows up instead, he realizes that he had put his letter in the wrong locker. Surprisingly, however, Mitsuri agrees to date Shiro, even though she feels inadequate compared to a girl like Mana. Mitsuri then becomes so overwhelmed with emotions that she fails to hear Shiro explain that his letter was meant for someone else, and leaves believing that Shiro is her boyfriend. The next day at school, the other students are shocked that the imbecile Shiro actually has a girlfriend somehow. And later that day, Mitsuri and Shiro have a date atop the school and she offers him some homemade cookies, while thanking him for choosing her over Mana. She then explains how she had always looked up to Mana and is proud of having finally bested her in some way. In response, however, Shiro warns Mitsuri that she needs to decide her own worth by herself instead of always comparing herself to Mana. He then finally confesses that the love letter Mitsuri received was meant for Mana and not for her, and apologizes. Mitsuri then denies his claim and begins hitting him on the chest, before running away crying. But after their interaction, Shiro becomes convinced that Mitsuri has an amasogi in her bag, and informs the other members of the club. And after hearing this news, they hurry to find Mitsuri before she can do any harm. Moments later, Kazuya and Kiriha confront Mitsuri outside of Mana's house, where Kazuya deduces that she's trying to kill Mana so she will not lose to her. But Mitsuri laughs at him for being completely wrong, however, and Kiriha stomps his crotch for it. Mitsuri then returns a pair of shoes to Mana and explains how grateful she was for the gift and how she used them every day, which only worsened her running abilities. But when she wore a different pair of shoes, her performance improved. She realized that Mana had given her the shoes to hinder her abilities. Unable to deny this truth, Mana tells Mitsuri of how she always looked up to her and wanted to stay ahead of her, so she could keep Mitsuri by her side forever. Believing that Mitsuri will never love her and instead hate her for what she has done, Mana puts on the shoes to kill Mitsuri instead. But she's stopped when Mitsuri kisses her and yells at her for giving up so easily without even attempting to apologize. The two girls then make amends, but the sweet moment is ruined when Mana suddenly becomes possessed by the amasogi. Before becoming fully corrupted, however, Mana cries out for Mitsuri to flee. And with no other choice, Kazuya and Kiriha use Ascension to overpower Mana's overwhelming strength and successfully destroy the shoes, returning Mana back to normal. At school the next day, Mana arrives in the clubroom in a wheelchair and explains that she lost her ability to walk soon after she returned home due to the amasogi's curse. The group is also surprised by Mitsuri's sudden change in appearance, and upon realizing that Mitsuri has big melons now, Shiro attempts to ask her out for real but is promptly rejected. Meanwhile, Kiriha thinks to herself that the timing of the amasogi possessing Mana was too much of a coincidence, and suspects that something or someone malicious is behind this. Some time later, Kazuya and Kiriha are lounging around in their room reading manga when the doorbell suddenly rings. Upon answering the door, Kazuya is met with a distraught Tsunao, who quickly informs Kazuya, Kiriha, and Kukuri that Kotetsu has been unable to wake up ever since being repaired, and that in order to help him, she was advised to seek out an echo stone from deep within the Cave of Divine Navel. Without wasting hesitation, the group quickly travels to their destination by train, and rent a room in a large hotel to stay in, with Kazuya in particular being amazed by the luxuriousness of the hotel. Meanwhile, Tsunao is worried about what she'll say to Kotetsu when he finally wakes up, after being mean to him for so long. Later that night, the three have a large luxurious feast together, during which Kiriha has Kazuya feed her some of his food, which of course fills Tsunao with envy. And to make matters worse for her, after dinner the three head to bed, where Tsunao is surprised to learn that Kazuya and Kiriha always share a bed, which she is also jealous of. The next day, the three walk through a forest and reach the cave, and eventually reach a large room with a giant stone tablet. Tsunao immediately places Kotetsu on the echo stone and prays for him to wake up. A large plant-like thing then suddenly appears from the blade, with Kotetsu sleeping in his human form inside. Tsunao immediately calls out to Kotetsu, and begins apologizing and begging him to wake up. Without warning, numerous amasogi suddenly appear around them, which Tsunao quickly recognizes as those she and Kotetsu had defeated in the past. From this, Kiriha deduces that these amasogi are manifestations of Kotetsu's self-doubt, and tells Tsunao to continue calling out to Kotetsu, while she and Kazuya defend them. Meanwhile, as Kotetsu sleeps, he hears Tsunao's voice calling out to him, but believes he's just imagining it because he wishes he could see her again. At that same time, Kotetsu begins reflecting on his past failures, and how often he's let Tsunao down, and believes that if he were to awaken now, Tsunao would tell him that he's not needed. Suddenly, a manifestation of Tsunao's older brother and Kotetsu's previous owner appears in Kotetsu's mind, telling him that fear and doubt will dull his edge as a katana. The amasogi that killed Tsunao's older brother then manifests amongst the other amasogi and promptly defeats Kazuya with its overwhelming strength, and shortly after, it begins devouring the orb that Kotetsu is encased in. The monster swallows Kotetsu whole, and Tsunao breaks down into tears. But at that very moment, Tsunao gets up, as both she and Kotetsu simultaneously realize that what they've always wanted was to be with each other as equal partners, like Kazuya and Kiriha. Kotetsu bursts out of the amasoga's mouth from a beam of light, and is finally reawakened. Tsunao and Kotetsu cry and apologize over and over again as they hold each other. Kazuya also begins to cry as he watches the two reconcile. But the sweet moment is interrupted by the amasogi attacking Tsunao and Kotetsu, but is instantly defeated as the two use Ascension to destroy it. Upon returning to the hotel, however, Tsunao lies on the floor completely immobile, unaware of the overwhelming side effects of Ascension. Once they return home, Kiriha tells Kazuya that the entire commotion was caused by the thought of a Tsugumomo not being wanted by their owners, and explains that Tsugumomos are actually quite emotional. In response, Kazuya reassures her that he wishes to be with her forever, causing her to blush. The next day at school, a girl named Mimine rocks back and forth in her chair while blaming Kazuya and Kiriha for destroying the previous amasogi and exclaims her desire to take them out, but Akito reminds her that they promised not to. But when Mimine ignores him and claims she'll eliminate Kazuya herself, Azami attacks Mimine before reminding them of their deal and disappearing. In response, a boy named Yasuki questions if they can truly trust Azami, but Akito says they have no choice. In reality, Akito, Mimine, and Yasuki are all Tsugumomos who once had human owners. But after decades of being abused by their owners, they finally found peace in Meoiga, a pocket dimension created as a paradise for Tsugumomos who want to live free from the ownership of humans. As such, Meoiga is inhabited by countless Tsugumomos that have suffered from the cruel treatment of their owner and seek a peaceful lifestyle. But when Akito and his sister Arumi first arrived at Meoiga, they were shocked to see two Tsugumomos revert back to their original forms. It was then that Tanman, the current leader of Meoiga, told the two siblings about how Meoiga was created by killing a god and stealing their stone shard to use as their own, and goes on to explain how their current shard's power is waning, and asks Akito and Arumi if they will aid Meoiga in killing a god to obtain a new stone shard. Azami then gave them information on which god was the most suitable target, and how to weaken them further. And with that, Akito, Arumi, Mimine, and Yasuki were sent to Kazuya's school to carry out Azami's plan. Meanwhile, back in the present, Azami spies on Kazuya and Kiriha from a distance, and watches them go to an arcade. At that same time, Akito plays at the arcade with Mimine, but fails to win a toy for her from a crane game, which upsets her. But when Mimine spots another arcade game she loves, she jumps over towards it and lands atop Kazuya. Mimine immediately recognizes Kazuya as she's been spying on him for a while, and screams his name aloud, but neither Kazuya nor Kiriha recognize her. Meanwhile, Akito tries to leave unnoticed as they weren't supposed to make contact with Kazuya, but Mimine calls him over to play games with them. Kazuya surprisingly recognizes Akito from their class, however, and welcomes him to play with them. Suddenly, all four of them are pulled into the arcade games world, and are forced to participate in the games tournament. A random man named Hiroki then reveals himself as the owner and host of the tournament, and the four are put on a team together. When the tournament begins, Kiriha is set to go first and fight against her opponent, Daruman. But despite being strong in the real world, Kiriha is quickly defeated due to her lack of understanding of fighting game mechanics. And as a penalty for her loss, Kiriha is forced to wear an embarrassing outfit. Akito then enters the ring after telling Kazuya that he's familiar with this particular fighting game, and easily defeats Daruman within a matter of seconds. But he forgoes penalizing the opponent with a costume change. Akito then blocks all his next opponent's attacks by subtly transforming his arms into blades without Kazuya and Kiriha noticing, to keep his identity as a Tsugumomo secret. Once his meter is full, Akito disarms his opponent and deals a fatal blow, but is also defeated in the process, resulting in a draw. Both teams then receive a penalty, resulting in Mimine's clothes suddenly turning into a bunny suit, though Akito once again forgoes penalizing the enemy. Up next, Mimine battles Namikawa in the next match of the tournament. But before beginning, Akito whispers to her not to use her powers, which Mimine assures him she will not. But as soon as their fight begins, Mimine uses her powers to reflect an attack. Kazuya and Kiriha are surprised by Mimine's ability, while Akito is simply stupefied by her actions. In the final round, Hiroki reveals himself as the final combatant, and Kazuya makes use of Kiriha to take him on. But despite granting himself several power-ups throughout the course of their fight, Hiroki is still eventually defeated by Kazuya, and the 5 of them are forcibly ejected out of the arcade world. Afterwards, Hiroki thanks Kazuya for helping him realize his reasons behind his desire for battle, and leaves after exclaiming that he is going to travel the world. Meanwhile, Azami angrily glares at Akito, and he tries to signal to Mimine that they need to leave. She misinterprets this and kisses Kazuya instead, angering Azami even further. In her frustration, Azami accidentally destroys the ceiling and it begins collapsing on her, but she's quickly saved by Kazuya. Kazuya then offers Azami a handkerchief to wipe her face, causing her to calm down and blush. Kiriha arrives shortly after to see what happened, but Azami has already disappeared before Kazuya can explain. Kiriha then asks Mimine if she is a mirrored Tsugumomo, which Mimine immediately confirms, much to Akito's dismay. And in an attempt to keep his own identity as a Tsugumomo hidden, Akito is forced to explain that he's Mimine's owner. When Akito and Mimine then return to the classroom later that night, Akito explains the events of the day to Yasuki and Arumi. And afterwards, Akito thinks to himself that he needs to be more careful from now on, and avoid Kazuya and Kiriha as much as possible. But the next day at school, Kazuya invites Akito to join their club, and due to Mimine's stupidity, the two are forced to join. Later at school, Akito explains to Azami that he ended up joining Kazuya's club, but Azami does not answer. Curious as to why, Mimine lifts up the kimono sash to find Azami sniffing the handkerchief she had received from Kazuya the other day. Upon realizing she is unwrapped, Azami quickly wraps herself back up and allows Akito to join the club so long as he does not harm Kazuya. Later that day, Akito and Mimine are introduced to Kukuri, and Akito is shocked to see that this little girl is the god they are supposed to kill. Suddenly, Mimine asks Kukuri to show off her godly powers, and Kukuri complies by summoning a bucket's worth of water which lands on Kiriha. This prompts Kiriha to begin grappling Kukuri, leading Akito to have even further doubts. Sometime later, Akito and Mimine are stopped by Arumi while walking home, who arrives to tell them that there's been a revolt in Mayoiga. When Akito and the others then arrive there moments later, they witness several smoking buildings in the distance. Akito and Yasuki speak with Tanman, the leader of Mayoiga, who explains that a radical group of Tsugumomos rebelled after committing the sin of feeding on humans to gain power. With the few that survived the rebellion, Tanman estimates that their entire village would not be enough to defeat Kukuri, and asks to use Arumi's divination powers to decide their next course of action. In a flashback, Kazuya tells Akito that he understands that Mayoiga members may have been treated unfairly by humans, but hopes they can find good partners for them someday so there would be no need for conflict. But Akito believes Kazuya is being naive, after having lived for so long and coming to the conclusion that Tsugumomos and humans cannot coexist. Back in the present, Tanman tells the group that he has decided to reawaken Miyurahi, the Tsugumomo that had once defeated a god and created Mayoiga. And once Miyurahi is reawakened, Tanman announces that Mayoiga will soon begin their full assault on Kukuri to claim her stone shard. However, Kukuri is contacted about the invading forces shortly after and informs Kazuya and the others to prepare for battle. But later that night, Kukuri acts very affectionate towards Kazuya because she's drunk. The doorbell rings and Kiriha goes to answer it, only to be met by Tsunao and Kotetsu, who informs Kiriha that they've been sent as reinforcements to help protect Kukuri, and that they'll be living at Kazuya's place for the time being. The next day, Tsunao transfers to Kazuya's school and introduces herself to her class. And although she acts like a normal student, during class she begins fantasizing about going to the same school as Kazuya before realizing that he's in a different class. Despite this, she's excited for the other opportunities that the two will have to interact, and joins Kazuya's club. Shiro is shocked by this and questions why Kazuya has yet another attractive female friend. And after Tsunao explains that she's actually living with Kazuya, Shiro begins to violently shake him by the collar, while Chisato thinks to herself that she should move in with him as well. After school, Kazuya, Kiriha, Kukuri, Tsunao, and Kotetsu head to the shrine awaiting the enemy's arrival. Meanwhile, Azami observes from the outskirts of the town's barrier. Prior to arriving there, Azami had spoken with Miyurahi and the other Mayoiga members, telling them not to harm Kazuya. But when Miyurahi and Tanman both state that fighting him would be difficult to avoid, Azami grows angry and begins emitting curse, before Akito calms her down and states that he will deal with Kazuya and Kiriha. Miyurahi and the others reach the shrine shortly after and face off against Kukuri and her group, and they exchange polite introductions before he and Kukuri clash. But while Kukuri and Miyurahi fight one-on-one, Kazuya offers to help, which Kukuri rejects even as she struggles to keep up with her opponent. With no other choice, Kukuri releases the barrier she had created around the city to return herself to her full power. And with her full power restored, Kukuri easily overpowers Miyurahi. Kazuya then begs Miyurahi to stop and promises that they can find good owners for all of Meoiga's members, but Miyurahi does not believe this to be possible. And as Miyurahi goes in for a final attack against Kukuri, he is suddenly killed by Azami as she impales him through the back and steals his stone shard. Two Azamis then reveal themselves as Kukuri realizes they had been waiting for this moment the entire time. Azami gives the stone shard to Kanaka's body, and Kazuya immediately recognizes Kanaka as his mother. Meanwhile, Arumi and Akito watch from behind the bushes, shocked at the turn of events, and are frustrated that they were unable to predict Azami's betrayal despite using Arumi's divination powers. After being revived with the use of a stone shard, Kanaka immediately greets Kukuri as her old friend. Kukuri then tells Kazuya and Kiriha that there is no time for a full explanation, and simply states that the two Azamis are amasogas that Kazuya created, which have now possessed his mother. Kazuya asks how they can save his mother, but Kukuri tells him she's already dead, and the amasoga's goal is to kill him too. She goes on to explain that Kazuya must be the one to destroy this amasogi, otherwise not only would he incur curse backlash strong enough to kill him, but the resulting backlash would decimate the entire region. And as Kukuri and Kanaka clash, the gang grows frightened by Kanaka's overwhelming power, while Akito and Arumi are also shocked, and fail to find any openings in her defenses even with Arumi's divination. Kiriha clings to Kazuya and begs him to flee, but Kukuri states that they cannot. She expresses her regrets and guilt over what happened to Kazuya's mother, to which Kanaka responds to undo the seal she put on Kazuya's memories to make up for it, but Kukuri refuses. And as they continue to clash, a few more people show up to fend off against Kanaka, including Tsunao, but none of them are able to land a hit on her, even after Tsunao uses Ascension. Suddenly, Kanaka also uses Ascension, and thanks to her newfound strength, she manages to deal the finish blow to Kukuri, killing her and stealing her stone shard. After seeing Kukuri die, Kokyo flies at Kanaka in a rage, but is taken out with no effort. Kanaka then turns her attention to Kazuya and Kiriha, who thinks back to when Kazuya was a baby and she had promised Kanaka that she would protect him no matter what. Upon remembering this, Kiriha reaffirms to Kazuya that the Kanaka before them is just an amasogi he created which he needs to defeat, and not his real mother. Kazuya agrees, and uses Ascensions to clash against Kanaka, but is easily overpowered, as Kanaka expresses her disappointment in Kazuya before going in for the killing blow. Kiriha then suddenly uses herself as a shield to save Kazuya, and is killed in the process. Kazuya immediately screams in horror as he frantically tries to gather Kiriha's remains. Before Kanaka can kill Kazuya, however, he is saved by Kasumi, his sister, who kicks Kanaka back, and tells Kazuya that they will buy him 3 years to get strong enough to defeat Kanaka. The two then rush to face Kanaka while Kazuya begins losing consciousness, and a large pillar of light bursts from the shrine. Kazuya awakens in his room moments later, and his father calls him down to the living room where he and others await. And after introducing themselves, they explain that they have trapped Kanaka within a time-stopping barrier for 3 years to buy Kazuya time to grow stronger. Kazuya then asks about Kukuri and is informed that she has indeed passed away. He then asks about Kiriha and is shown her collected remains, leaving Kazuya speechless. As Kazuya rests in his bed, clutching the box of Kiriha's remains, he thinks about her and Kukuri and begins to cry. The next day, however, Kazuya washes his face and prepares to leave, after having regained his resolve to grow stronger so he can save his friends and allow his mother a peaceful rest. When Kazuya then meets the others at the door, the three prepare to leave to begin his training. Thanks for watching this anime recap, and I hope to see you all again in the next one.
Take it.